Well, the Bridgegate trial resumed in federal court in Newark today. David Wallerstein, he took the stand again. Now, if you remember, he is the former Port Authority official who pleaded guilty, and he is now cooperating with the prosecutors. He has also said that Christie knew about the scheme to close the lanes on the GW Bridge. Wallerstein says Christie was told about it specifically during a 9/11 memorial service while the closures were in effect. In fact, in the second day. He claimed at the time, and there you see the picture of that supposed meeting, that Christie laughed when he heard about it and how it was done to punish the Fort Lee mayor, the Democrat, who chose not to endorse Chris Christie. Wallerstein also testified that Christie nicknamed him Winston Wolfe. That's the guy on your screen. He's the Pulp Fiction character played by Harvey Keitel. Winston Wolfe, as you remember, was the fixer who got John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson out of a fix. You cannot make this up. Prosecutors, they have previously said they believe that Christie knew about Bridgegate and that they prove it at trial. Now their key witness is saying the very same thing. So what is the threshold to indict the governor? Let us bring in our legal panel right now. Some familiar faces. Jim Kasuris, he's back, a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association. He's frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. Doug Van Oys, a founding partner of Carson Van Oys, focusing on corporate misconduct and selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country. Mayo Bartlett's here as well, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Guys, and Jimmy, I'll start with you in that, I was surprised that in opening statements the prosecution said not that they believed the governor was involved, but they were going to prove the governor knew about the lane closures. Then they chose, though, not to indict him, while they chose to indict Bridget Kelly and Baroni. Now we hear a witness testifying, not with visual proof here, but about the exact conversation they had and about the participants of the conversation, and moreover, that, you know, the governor wasn't too displeased by it. In fact, he was laughing. In fact, he also goes on to say that another person within the governor's office knew about it. He thought it was a bad idea, but he also counseled against going any further with it because it would be bad. So if the prosecution says we're going to prove it, I would think they got more than just this guy's account of it. Why wouldn't they indict the governor with others? Why say we're going to do something, and if what he did was clearly wrong or criminal, then why wouldn't he be one of a group of people that are already under indictment, but he's excluded?
The only thing I can think
unindicted co-conspirator, right? Did I get that right?
But if he even qualifies as that. Because there's one thing to know that a crime is being committed, and even being committed on your behalf. And it's another thing to be able to prove that you not only knew about it, but that you participated in it. And a lot of what's coming out here, and I'm not threading needles here, what's coming out here is that he was told about it, he was pleased, he laughed at the notion that somebody who would not support him was being punished. But what it appears as though is that there's no evidence that he knew about it beforehand and that he directed it or participated.
But he knew about it, if you believe Waldstein's account, during it. Not after the fact he was told it was happening. For 2 more days this took place. There was calls from multiple mayors that were being impacted by this. There was complaints by officials. There's complaints by residents. This also, Doug, is the same governor who went out to a press conference and when pressed about this, said absolutely not, didn't have anything to do with it, had no knowledge of it. This was a traffic study. What do you think, I'm out there putting cones out? Remember that line? So people could have died on this thing. Forget about, they timed this to be right in the first week of school, during high holy days, a whole bunch of different things just to have maximum effect to cause discomfort, not just for the mayor, but to blame the mayor for what was going on in his neck of the woods. My point is, okay, this isn't just a bad guy. Isn't this abuse of power? Isn't this,
Well, we're talking about prosecuting a governor who's an elected official. He's been elected by the people. The source of this information is a person who's pled guilty to a felony. So before you indict the governor of the state, maybe the prosecutor's office says we need more than the words of a felon.
You are a former prosecutor. if you in your opening statement say that you are going to prove, no one made you say that. You could have said, we believe the governor, knew about this, along with the two people that we're going to bring in front of you. They didn't choose to say that. They say, we're going to prove the governor knew about this. So I would believe, you know more than I do, that the feds wouldn't say that unless they could prove it. Because they didn't have to say that.
I think I said this last week. The only way that story makes sense to people bragging about what they did for their boss is if their boss knows. So I believe the prosecutor has to believe that. But that's a different question. A lot of times a prosecutor can say, we believe that this happened, but we choose not to indict. And when you're talking about taking a sitting governor and putting him through a trial, they may be making the decision that you need more than the words of a convicted felon.
Now, Governor Christie Mayo did testify before the legislature, okay? Now, I don't believe they had subpoena power, but nonetheless, he stated, and again, he did today in the media, I knew nothing about this. Let's hypothetically, and they haven't done it yet, produce a smoking gun that he knew. Is there any place where he would have perjured himself? Forget about more than just the court of public opinion?
Well, it depends on whether the legislative body in New Jersey required him to be sworn when he gave that testimony. And if you look at the United States Congress, quite often you have people who are going in to testify and they're not required to swear. So they can go in and give misleading information, sometimes outright intentionally false information. And if it's not sworn testimony, it does not rise to the level of perjury. However, there's another issue here, and that issue is whether Governor Christie met with any federal agents. And if he met with any federal agents and gave misinformation, he could be charged just as Martha Stewart was. And there, it doesn't matter whether he actually played a role in the planning of this shutdown of the traffic on the bridge.
And also, there's a second element to this on the political side. He's not running for re-election, but already the legislature has had preliminary conversations, and I've talked with a few of the principals that would be the ones doing it. There is a movement that maybe there could be impeachment proceedings for this governor here, but as they say, stay tuned. Okay, speaking of stay tuned, the guy who's made that famous recently, I'm talking about Preet Bharara, he got his sights set on somebody, also a governor, albeit across the river. Governor Cuomo, he's got his own problems to worry about here. Cuomo himself has not been accused of any wrongdoing, so let's get that clear. However, his closest aide, former Executive Deputy Secretary Joe Percoco, he's been arrested. He's been accused of lining his pockets in connection with a program to boost upstate businesses. They've got here a thread of emails and more here. It seems he's in a really bad way. Now, we want to ask the panel what's happening behind the scenes and whether or not Percoco's wife, you see there, is now likely getting targeted by the prosecutors. Mayo, let's start here in that, pull the curtain back for the public who says, okay, well, one of his aides and a couple other guys, Hal being one of them, these guys, if you look at the thread of information, clearly Bharara thinks he's got him, okay? That there was quid pro quos. These idiots used lines from The Sopranos about getting, the Herb and the ZD code names for payoffs and all the rest. Morons. Anyway, but
ZD's expensive.
yeah. But Mrs. Percoco, who per the allegation here, or the indictment, she was put in a position. He was looking. They couldn't make the mortgage payments. Percoco's. He was saying, you gotta help me out here, gotta help me out here. Again, the governor not attached to any of the threads of these, but nonetheless, she gets put in a job where she's helping create these corporate videos. She never appears by name anywhere, okay? So again, help the public pull back the curtain. Percoco's in trouble. He doesn't have a lot of money. Could be looking at real time here, not 12 months in a country club. This is the beginning of squeezing, right? And the wife is really the fulcrum, am I right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you go after someone's significant other, someone's wife or their family, their children, it puts them in a very, very difficult position.
But help the audience. Tell me what the conversations are happening behind closed doors. Percoco and his attorney sits down with who, even not by name, by title, and tell me how the conversation kind of goes along. You were a former prosecutor.
You'd sit down and clearly this person knows that his wife is looking at possible time. You can see the collapse of your entire life around you. You're given an opportunity to sit down and to maybe revisit your recollection about what actually occurred and who may have been involved. But all along, you know that even if it's a reasonably minor charge against the wife, You don't want your wife gambling and going in at a sentencing guideline hearing to determine how much time she may get. So you really start to feel absolutely the pressure, especially if you're a person who has limited means. And when you start talking about defending these types of cases, it's extremely expensive. So you really have to think about it.
Conversation's a lot more direct.
And there's a reason she wasn't indicted
That's
over
right.
the rest of them, right?
That's
Explain
right.
why she wasn't like the husband was and everything else.
Because the federal government continues their investigation long after the indictment. Many of our clients are familiar with the word superseding indictment. They indict, and then they indict again, and then they add more charges or they add defendants. And the conversation is really simple. Look, you can flip, and we can go to the government and save your wife from prosecution, or your wife will get a non-pros. She'll have to admit her guilt, so she's neutralized. But those are your options. And if you want to take it to the end and go to trial, you might be sitting next to your wife, and you would be putting your entire family in danger of both parents going to jail.
And sometimes there's even more than that, because there are other things that are out there, and they will even try to sometimes just hedge their bets and get you to maybe let them know that there's more stuff out there, because they can say, look, you know, as you say, stay tuned. What else is there? You know, we can look at your kids. What are they doing? Sometimes even state charges come in.
And I imagine that a person once referred to Doug as the third son of the late Mario Cuomo and a brother in everything but blood to Andrew Cuomo. Pripahar is not doing this and not doing it this way if he didn't intend to try and go up the food chain. That's been at least his MO, whether it was going after Silver, going after Skelos, going after corruption in Albany, Wall Street, name it. He starts here and he just moves north, right?
Well, that's why you could see the dangers in a scenario like this, and that's a knock on the system kind of generally, is that you're sort of incentivizing or putting a person in a position that they could possibly say things that maybe didn't happen, because they're the only person they want here is one particular person. And so I'm not saying that's happening here. I don't know what's happening here, but you could see how a person could all of a sudden say, now I remember something. Please don't do this to my wife.
And we should also say it's believed that you already have one cooperating witness right now working with the feds in this case, so the race is on. If you believe somebody else is flipping here, if you want to have that on the table, you don't have the luxury of waiting to see what they know and what they don't know. As I say, the race is to the courthouse door, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Stay tuned. Coming up next, Congress has just overridden today President Obama's veto, the first time, by the way, in the president's 2 terms. And they've passed a bill that would allow 9/11 families to sue Saudi Arabia. I got to tell you, it sounds good on the surface, but the question is, what about, could it be a Pyrrhic victory? Could it open up a legal can of worms for Americans and American foreign policy? We will debate and we'll discuss.